Julian Thorne was the kind of man who thought the world existed solely to be his playground. He was a billionaire hedge fund manager who measured people's worth by their bank accounts and treated anyone earning less than 7 figures like furniture. But on a rainy Tuesday night at Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, Julian made a fatal error. He decided to mock his waitress, Elena, by sarcastically asking her for stock tips to entertain his wealthy friends. He expected a stutter. He expected confusion. Instead, she looked him dead in the eye and delivered a sentence that froze the room and started the clock on his total destruction. This is the story of how the most powerful man on Wall Street got played by the one person he never saw coming. The rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of L'Argent, the most exclusive dining establishment in New York City. Perched on the 60th floor of a midtown skyscraper, the restaurant was a sanctuary of velvet, crystal, and whispers that cost thousands of dollars. Inside, the air smelled of truffle oil and old money. Elena adjusted the collar of her stiff white uniform. Her feet were throbbing. She had been on a double shift since 6 in the morning, and now, at 9 at night, she was tending to table 4, the power table. Sitting at the head of table 4 was Julian Thorne. Julian was 34, handsome in a predatory way, with slicked-back dark hair and a bespoke suit that cost more than Elena's entire year of rent. He was the CEO of Thorne Capital, a man known for hostile takeovers and gutting companies for parts. Beside him sat his entourage, Marcus, a sycophantic junior partner, heavy-set board member Arthur Pendleton, and a stunning model named Chloe, who looked bored out of her mind. "This wine is corked," Julian announced loudly, not even looking up as Elena approached to refill the water glasses. He pushed the $2,000 bottle of Chateau Margaux away with a grimace of disgust. "Take it away, bring another, and actually check it this time." Elena knew the wine wasn't corked. Julian had barely taken a sip. It was a power move, a way to assert dominance over his environment. "Of course, Mr. Thorne, I apologize immediately," Elena said, her voice soft and practiced. She kept her eyes lowered, playing the part of the invisible servant perfectly. "God, the help in this city is getting worse by the day," Julian muttered to Marcus as Elena retreated with the bottle. "You'd think for the prices we pay, they could find someone who knows the difference between vinegar and vintage." Marcus laughed, a sharp, barking sound. "They're not paid to think, Julian. They're paid to carry things." Elena returned minutes later with a fresh bottle. She performed the ritual perfectly, presenting the label, uncorking it silently, pouring the taste. Julian drank it, smirked, and waved a hand dismissively. "Better. Barely." Elena moved to step away, desperate to get back to the safety of the kitchen. But Julian wasn't done with his entertainment. He had had a rough day in the markets. Thorne Capital was over-leveraged on a tech merger that was stalling, and he needed to feel powerful. He needed a target. "Hey," Julian snapped his fingers. "You! Waitress!" Elena froze. She turned back slowly. "Yes, sir? Is everything all right with the Dover sole?" "The fish is fine," Julian said, leaning back in his leather chair, swirling his wine glass. He looked at his friends with a grin that promised cruelty. "We were just discussing the market. Volatile times, right, Arthur?" Arthur grunted in agreement, cutting into his steak. "So I'm curious," Julian continued, locking eyes with Elena. "You see rich people in here all day. You hear us talking. I want to give you a chance, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." The restaurant went quiet near their table. Guests at adjacent tables glanced over. Julian's voice was projected, just loud enough to be a performance. "Tell me," Julian smirked, "where should I put my money tomorrow? Come on, give me some street wisdom. Should I buy gold? Crypto? Or should I just stuff it under a mattress like your people probably do? Chloe, the model, giggled nervously. Julian, stop it. That's mean. It's not mean, it's philanthropy. Julian laughed. I'm asking for her expert opinion. Come on, honey, speak up. Entertain us. Elena stood very still. Her face was impassive, a porcelain mask, but inside, a cold fire was igniting. She looked at Julian Thorne, really looked at him. She saw the arrogance in his jawline, the cruelty in his eyes, and the slight tremor in his left hand that he was trying to hide by gripping the wine glass too tightly. She knew that tremor. She knew what it meant. I'm just a waitress, sir, Elena said quietly. I wouldn't want to bore you. Oh, you couldn't bore me more than the Fed chairman, Julian goaded. Give it a shot. 1 tip. If it's good, I'll tip you 10 grand. If it's bad, well, you're used to being broke, right? The table erupted in laughter. Marcus slapped the table. Classic Julian. Elena took a deep breath. She shifted her weight, her posture changing from servile to statuesque in a blink. The submissiveness evaporated from her eyes, replaced by a razor-sharp intelligence that felt out of place in the dim dining room. She stepped closer to the table. Actually, Mr. Thorne, Elena said, her voice clear and devoid of any accent or hesitation, since you asked so nicely. The table quieted down, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. I wouldn't worry about gold or crypto, Elena said, her gaze piercing right through him. If I were you, I would liquidate your entire short position in Novacore Dynamics before the market opens at 9:30 a.m. tomorrow. Julian's smile faltered. Novacore was a mid-cap defense contractor he had been betting against for 3 months. It was a private position. Very few people knew the extent of his exposure. Excuse me? He scoffed, though his eyes narrowed. And why would a waitress suggest that? Elena didn't blink. Because at 8 a.m. tomorrow, the Department of Defense is going to announce that Novacore has won the Artemis contract for the new drone guidance systems. The stock will triple by noon. And considering you're leveraged 20-1 on that short, using the liquidity from your client's pension funds, if you don't cover by morning, Thorne Capital will be insolvent by lunch. The silence that followed was absolute. The clinking of silverware stopped. Marcus's mouth hung open. Even the kitchen noise seemed to fade away. Julian sat frozen, his face drained of color, the ruddy flush of wine replaced by a ghostly pallor. The Artemis contract. That was a rumor, a ghost story. Everyone thought Lockheed had that locked down. How did she know? And more importantly, how did she know about the leverage ratio on his pension accounts? Elena smoothed the front of her apron. The servile mask slid back into place, though her eyes remained cold. Will there be anything else, Mr. Thorne? Or shall I bring the dessert menu? Julian couldn't speak. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Dessert, Arthur croaked, breaking the tension, though he looked at Julian with sudden suspicion. Excellent choice, Elena said. She turned on her heel and walked away, leaving a table of billionaires staring at her back in terrified confusion. Julian Thorne did not sleep that night. He spent the hours between 1 a.m. and 6 a.m. pacing the floor of his penthouse overlooking Central Park, screaming into his phone. I don't care what time it is in London, he roared at his head analyst. Find out everything you can about the Artemis contract, now. Julian, it's impossible, the analyst stammered over the speakerphone. The DoD isn't scheduled to release the vendor list until next week. Novacore is a dead dog. We're making a killing on the shorts. If we pull out now, we lose the premium. Just do it. Julian smashed his fist onto his mahogany desk. The waitress's voice echoed in his head. It wasn't just what she said. It was the specificity. Leveraged 20-1. Pension funds. Those were secrets. Deep, dark secrets buried in offshore ledgers in the Caymans. How could a woman serving Dover Sole know about the structural weakness of his hedge fund? She guessed, Julian whispered to himself, pouring a glass of scotch with a shaking hand. She's just some lucky amateur who read a blog post. She was trying to scare me. But he couldn't shake the fear. At 7:45 a.m., Julian was in his office on Wall Street. The trading floor was buzzing with the pre-market energy. He stood on the balcony overlooking the rows of traders, his eyes glued to the Bloomberg terminal screens. "Sir," Marcus approached him, looking pale. "We held the position. We didn't cover. You said it was a bluff." "It is a bluff," Julian said, though sweat was beading on his forehead. "Watch. 8 a.m. Nothing will happen." 7:58 a.m. 7:59 a.m. Julian held his breath. 8:01 a.m. The news ticker at the bottom of the giant screen flashed red. Breaking news. Pentagon awards $40 billion Artemis contract to Novacore Dynamics. The trading floor erupted. It was instant chaos. "Oh my God," Marcus screamed, grabbing his hair. "Look at the ticker. Novacore is up 40% in pre-market. It's climbing. 50%. Cover!" Julian shrieked, grabbing the railing of the balcony. "Buy it back! Buy it all back!" "There's no liquidity," a trader yelled from the floor. "Everyone is buying. The price is vertical. We're getting squeezed." Julian watched in horror as his net worth began to evaporate in real time. The numbers on the screen were moving so fast they were a blur. Because he had bet against the company using borrowed money, every dollar the stock went up cost him 20. By 9:30 a.m., when the market officially opened, Novacore was up 180%. By 10 a.m., Thorne Capital had lost $400 million. By noon, exactly as Elena had predicted, the margin calls started coming in. The banks wanted their money. The pension funds wanted answers. Julian sat in his office, his tie undone, his suit jacket on the floor, staring at a loss that would take him years to recover from. He wasn't bankrupt. He was too big to fail completely in one day. But he was wounded, bleeding. His reputation as the golden boy was shattered, and all he could think about was the waitress. "Get the car," Julian said to his assistant, his voice a low growl. "Sir, the board is calling an emergency meeting. I said get the car." Julian threw his coffee mug against the wall, shattering it. "We're going back to l'Argent." It was 4 p.m. when Julian stormed into the restaurant. It was closed between lunch and dinner service, the lights dimmed, the staff setting tables for the evening rush. The manager, a nervous Frenchman named Pierre, rushed over. "Mr. Thorne, we are not open, but for you—" "Where is she?" Julian demanded, pushing past him. "The waitress from last night, the brunette. Table 4. "Elena?" Pierre looked confused. "She's in the back, prepping the silverware, but—" Julian marched through the swinging doors into the kitchen. It was a stainless steel labyrinth of steam and noise. He found her in the corner, polishing forks with a calm, rhythmic motion. She didn't look up as he approached. "Who are you?" Julian hissed, stopping inches from her. Elena placed a polished fork into a velvet-lined bin. She looked up slowly. Her expression was different today. There was no fear, no subservience, just a cool, detached amusement. "I told you, Mr. Thorne, I'm just a waitress." "Bullshit!" Julian slammed his hand on the prep table. "You cost me $400 million today. You knew about the Artemis contract. You knew about the leverage. That is insider information. That is corporate espionage. Who sent you? Was it Sterling Hale? Was it the Russians?" Elena sighed, as if she were dealing with a petulant child. She picked up another fork. "I didn't cost you anything, Julian," she said, using his first name with a jarring familiarity. I gave you the best advice you've ever received. You chose not to take it because you couldn't bear the idea that a woman wearing an apron knew more than you." "How did you know?" he demanded, his voice shaking. Elena leaned in, dropping her voice to a whisper. "Because, Julian, before I was a waitress, I was the one who wrote the code your algorithm is based on." Julian froze. His eyes widened. "My algorithm," he whispered. "The Titan system. That was developed by—" He trailed off. "Developed by Dr. Richard Vance," Elena finished for him. "My father." The color drained from Julian's face for the second time in 24 hours. "Vance?" Julian breathed. "Richard Vance died in prison 3 years ago. He was convicted of embezzlement." "Embezzlement that you framed him for," Elena said, her voice dropping to a deadly temperature. "You stole his code, you planted the evidence, and you let him rot in a cell so you could launch Thorne Capital on the back of his genius. You thought his family disappeared. You thought we were gone." She took a step forward, forcing Julian to take a step back. "I've spent the last 3 years scrubbing floors and serving wine, waiting for the moment your greed made you sloppy," Elena said. "Yesterday I saw the cracks, and today was just a warning shot." Julian laughed, a desperate, incredulous sound. "You think you can take me down? You're a nobody. I have lawyers who cost more than your life. I can have you fired in 10 seconds. I can have you arrested for harassment." "Go ahead," Elena challenged. "Fire me. But if you do, you'll never find out about the other flaw in the Titan system. The one I programmed in before my father was arrested. The one that's going to activate in—" She checked her cheap wristwatch. 48 hours. Julian stared at her. He felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. He didn't know if she was bluffing. She had been right about Nova Corps. Could she be right about this? "What flaw?" he asked, his voice trembling. Elena smiled. It was a terrifying smile. "I'm afraid that consultation fee is a lot higher than 10 grand, Mr. Thorne." She untied her apron, folded it neatly, and placed it on the table. "I'm taking my break. If you want to save your company, meet me at the library on 5th Avenue at midnight, alone. If you bring your security, the system crashes, and Thorne Capital goes to 0. She walked past him, bumping his shoulder. Julian stood alone in the kitchen, the smell of dish soap and vengeance hanging heavy in the air. He had come here to destroy her. Instead, he realized with a sinking heart, he was about to beg her for mercy. That was an intense setup. Julian Thorne arrived at the New York Public Library steps at 11:58 p.m., precisely 2 minutes early. The massive stone lions, patience and fortitude, stood guard, silent witnesses to his humiliation. He wore a heavy wool coat, but he was shivering, not from the cold, but from sheer terror. He had checked the perimeter himself. No Marcus, no Arthur, and most importantly, no security detail. He felt naked without his usual phalanx of protection. But Elena's threat, Thorne Capital goes to 0, had been too specific, too confident to ignore. As the clock tower chimed midnight, the heavy bronze doors of the library parted, just enough for a figure to slip out. It was Elena. She was no longer wearing the stiff white uniform. She was dressed in dark, simple slacks and a sharp blazer, looking less like a waitress and more like the disgraced prodigy she truly was. She carried a slim, worn leather briefcase. "You came alone," Elena observed, walking down the steps, her gaze fixed on him. "Smart. I was hoping you were smart enough to realize I wasn't bluffing." "Who are you working for?" Julian demanded, ignoring the slight. His pride was still fighting his survival instinct. "How did you get the DOD file? Did my father hire you?" Elena stopped on the landing, 3 steps above him. She was looking down in every sense of the word. "My father. Richard Vance died 3 years ago. The Titan algorithm, the one that made you rich overnight, was the only thing he cared about. When you framed him, stole his work, and left his daughter with nothing but his shame and his journals, you created a ghost. She opened the briefcase. It wasn't full of documents, but neatly lined with 4 thick, black notebooks, their pages covered in complex mathematical notation. I didn't need the DoD file, Julian. I just needed to know you were using the original Titan core code. And I know it inside and out, because I've spent every night for the last 3 years studying the journals my father smuggled out of prison. He perfected the contingency, a self-destruct function hidden in the algorithm's liquidity balancing module. Julian's face went white again. The Titan system managed the rapid, high-frequency trades that made Thorne Capital billions. A self-destruct function? The contingency? Julian croaked. That's insane. It would violate every regulatory benchmark. It would be financial suicide. For you, yes. For my father, it was justice, Elena said coldly. He built it to prevent a greedy, reckless mind like yours from using his system to manipulate markets. If the system detects a highly leveraged, high-risk position that exceeds the initial ethical parameters, which your Nova Core short certainly did, it triggers a counter-trade protocol, a negative feedback loop. What happens in 48 hours? The loop reaches critical mass, Elena explained, gesturing to the tallest notebook. It's a phased collapse. It starts by selling off all non-essential assets to meet margin calls. Then it begins aggressively shorting your strongest performing stock, Veritas Holdings, to generate enough capital for the fictional regulatory fines my father designed into the code. The market will see it as a panicked fire sale. By Friday at the bell, you won't have a single liquid asset, and the SEC will be looking for the source of the market panic. They'll find the contingency protocol. They'll find the flaw, and they'll trace the original intellectual property back to my father. Julian stumbled back a step. This wasn't just revenge. It was an elaborate, calculated operation of financial warfare designed to destroy him from the inside out, ending with a posthumous acquittal for the man he ruined. Tell me how to stop it, Julian pleaded, the arrogance finally stripped away, replaced by desperation. I'll give you 10 million. 20. Name your price. I'll hire you. You can have a corner office. You can run the firm. Elena laughed, a short, humorless sound. Run your firm? You stole my legacy, Julian. Do you think I want your used goods? Then what do you want? Elena stepped down, now standing directly in front of him. She was closer than she had been in the restaurant, and Julian could smell a faint scent of coffee and something sharp, like rosemary. The price is simple, she said, her eyes flashing in the streetlights. First, you will publicly apologize to the memory of Richard Vance. You will confess to framing him for embezzlement and admit you stole the Titan algorithm. Second, you will transfer 51% of Thorne Capital, the controlling interest, into a newly established charitable trust dedicated to financial ethics research, chaired by me. Third, you will resign your position as CEO, effective immediately. 51%? Resign? You're asking for my life, Julian yelled, losing his composure. I'm asking for the fraction of your life that was built on my father's suffering, Elena corrected. You have 46 hours. If the paperwork isn't signed by 9 a.m. on Friday morning, I do nothing, and you lose everything anyway. Your choice. A slow, controlled dissolution managed by me, or a catastrophic collapse managed by my father's ghost. Julian stared at the briefcase. He had traded favors, manipulated markets, and destroyed men smaller than him for a decade. He was the shark in the water. Now he was the injured prey, and the most dangerous predator he'd ever met was a waitress he had mocked over a bottle of wine. "I'll need my legal team," Julian argued weakly. "No," Elena shook her head. "You need a notary and a signature. This isn't a negotiation, Julian. This is a ransom." She turned to walk away. "Wait!" Julian called out, his voice hoarse. "How do I know you'll stop it even if I sign?" Elena paused, looking over her shoulder. "Because, unlike you, Julian, I value my word. And unlike you, I still care about the stability of the market. I just don't care about the stability of your bank account." She melted back into the shadows, leaving Julian standing alone under the gaze of the stone lions, holding the fate of his billion-dollar empire in his shaking hands. Julian Thorne did not call his lawyers. He didn't call the police. He called Marcus. "I need you to find a notary, a private one. Now," Julian ordered over the phone at 4:02 a.m. His voice was raw. "And I need every programmer who worked on the Titan architecture to meet me in the war room at 6:00 a.m. Confidentiality agreement, ironclad. If a word of this leaks, I kill them myself." Julian knew better than to trust Elena, but he knew even better than to ignore her. She hadn't just predicted the Novacore disaster. She had understood the deepest, most proprietary structure of his firm. He had to assume the contingency was real. The programmers, bleary-eyed and terrified, gathered in the high-security bunker beneath Thorne Capital. Julian didn't mince words. He showed them the core equations Elena had referenced, equations that looked disturbingly like the foundation of a kill switch. "Find it," Julian commanded, gesturing to the code screens. "Find the virus. Patch it. Now." The team worked frantically, fueled by fear and endless coffee. 2 hours later, the lead programmer, a young woman named Leah, shook her head. "Mr. Thorne, the code is clean," Leah reported, her voice strained. "We ran a full deep scan. There are no rogue protocols, no contingency. If she told you this system exists, she lied." Julian felt a flicker of hope, immediately overshadowed by a wave of crushing confusion. Why would she lie about the method? She had been right about the Novacore target. "She's playing me," Julian muttered, pacing the room. "She knew I would check the code first. It's a distraction." He called Marcus. "Forget the notary. Find me everything on Elena Vance. Every address, every credit card statement, every parking ticket. She's hiding something here in New York. Find her real weak point." Marcus, sensing the shift in power, was ruthless. By 8 a.m., he had a file. Elena Vance lived in a small, rent-controlled apartment in Queens, not far from the Astoria ferry. She shared the space with her younger sister, Clara. Clara Vance, 22, was a talented but struggling artist who was battling a debilitating autoimmune disorder. "She needs expensive medication, Mr. Thorne," Marcus reported, a cruel satisfaction in his voice. "The bills are astronomical. That's why Elena works 2 jobs. The restaurant, and she tutors college students online late at night." Julian smiled, a chilling, predatory expression returning to his face. Elena had shown him the trap, but she hadn't secured her flanks. "Excellent, Marcus. You just found our leverage," Julian said. "Call the pharmacy that fills Clara's prescription. Tell them the insurance company has declined coverage and that the payment is overdue. Offer to pay it in full, anonymously, but only if they delay the next refill by 72 hours. "Delay the medication?" Marcus asked, slightly hesitant. "Yes. Just a small taste of desperation," Julian hissed. "Then I want you to go to the apartment. Offer Elena a deal. She drops the contingency threat. She signs a non-disclosure, and I guarantee her sister's health coverage for life. No 51% transfer, no resignation. If she refuses, the payment for the medication vanishes. and the landlord gets a tip about the illegal second tenant. Julian was back in his element. He might have lost 400 million, but he hadn't lost his viciousness. He was going to expose her lie, force her hand, and crush her sister to get what he wanted. Marcus went to Queen's that afternoon. He found Elena leaving the tutoring centre, her face etched with exhaustion. "Miss Vance," Marcus said, stepping out of the black sedan. "Mr. Thorne sent me." Elena's eyes narrowed, instantly recognizing the threat. "I told him to come alone." He realized the situation required professional handling. "We know about your sister, Clara," Marcus said, laying the bait. "She missed her dose this morning, didn't she? The pharmacy had some technical difficulties." Elena's facade finally cracked. The cold intelligence was replaced by raw, frantic fear. "What did you do?" "Nothing we can't undo." Marcus smiled, pulling out a folder filled with insurance paperwork and a check made out to the pharmacy. "Julian is willing to forgive your little performance if you sign this non-disclosure. He'll pay for Clara's treatment for the rest of your lives. A comfortable life. Stop the game, Elena. You're outmatched. You have nothing but a lie." Elena looked at the folder, then back at Marcus. She was trapped. Her sister's life was more important than the revenge she had been planning for years. She was defeated. Marcus smirked. "Just sign it, and you go back to being invisible. The revenge can wait." "It can't wait," Elena whispered. She reached out, not for the pen, but for the folder. Marcus handed it over smugly. Elena didn't look at the insurance forms. She looked at a small, printed detail Marcus had carelessly left visible on the cover sheet. The corporate logo for Sterling Hale, the insurance underwriter for Thorne Capital's executive accounts. Elena's face hardened. She looked up at Marcus, a terrible smile spreading across her face. "You're right, Marcus," she said, tapping the logo. "I lied about the contingency in the code. I knew Julian would look there." Marcus looked confused. "Then you have nothing." "Oh, I have everything," Elena corrected. "The system Julian needs to worry about isn't Titan. It's the one I've been manipulating for 3 years while working 3 jobs. It's the one that manages his entire firm's liability portfolio, the Sterling Hale Insurance Portal." "What?" "When Julian Thorne framed my father, he exposed my sister to a medical crisis, making her rely on the insurance system he controlled," Elena said, her voice rising with sudden, terrifying power. "I didn't need to hack his trading platform. I needed to hack his exposure. I've been slowly rerouting every single one of Thorne Capital's liability claims, from minor malpractice suits to major regulatory risks, into one single, massive, aggregated liability account." She held up the Sterling Hale folder. "Getty images. Julian just committed insurance fraud by interfering with my sister's claim. And you, Marcus, you are the accessory," Elena said, her eyes glittering with cold triumph. "The actual collapse is not based on bad trades. It's based on one single, massive $1.2 billion liability claim that hits Thorne Capital's books at 9:02 a.m. on Friday. The contingency wasn't a virus in the code, Julian. It was a time bomb in his accounting." Marcus stumbled back, horrified. The market could survive a trading loss, but $1 billion, uninsurable liability would wipe out the firm's capital base instantly. "You have 46 hours, Julian," Elena said into the air, knowing Marcus would report every word. "And now, I'm going to call my sister's pharmacy and tell them that I will pay the full price for her medication. And then, I'm going to start dialing the SEC." Elena turned and walked away, leaving a paralyzed Marcus standing next to the black sedan, the folder with the Sterling Hale logo lying abandoned on the curb. Julian Thorne had just made the ultimate mistake. He attacked the one thing Elena loved more than her revenge. That was a brilliant reveal in Part 4. The true nature of Elena's contingency is now known, and Julian's fate is sealed unless he can find a way out. The moment Marcus delivered the report, Julian Thorne knew he was facing a different kind of adversary. Elena wasn't playing on the trading floor. She was operating in the shadows of liability and compliance, a far more complicated arena than pure high-frequency trading. The $1.2 billion liability claim, aggregated by redirecting every minor suit against Thorne Capital into one catastrophic settlement fund via the Sterling Hale portal, was real, and it was irreversible in the 48 hours remaining. Julian's arrogance had morphed into a cold, terrifying clarity. He wasn't dealing with a petty blackmailer. He was facing a surgical executioner. He had to pivot from defense to offense, and he had only one card left to play: exposure. "Marcus, forget the settlement," Julian ordered. "The $1.2 billion is a distraction. If that claim hits, we're done anyway. We need to destroy her credibility before 9:00 a.m. Friday." "How, Julian?" "She hasn't broken any laws," Marcus countered. "She was just redirecting internal accounting. We were the ones who interfered with the pharmacy." "She committed financial terrorism against a publicly traded company," Julian snarled, pacing his office. "We are going to leak the entire story to the press. Not the truth, the narrative. We'll paint her as a rogue, vengeful hacker, obsessed with avenging her criminal father. We leak the connection between Richard Vance, the embezzler, and the waitress using stolen Titan knowledge to attack us." Julian sat down, his head in his hands, staring at the old faded picture Marcus had pulled from Richard Vance's prison file. A smiling Richard with a young Elena and a toddler Clara. The sight unlocked the memory he had worked so hard to bury. 10 years ago, Richard Vance was the undisputed genius of quantitative finance. He developed the Titan algorithm for ethical, stable, long-term investing. Richard believed that algorithms should serve people, not just profit. Julian Thorne was a mid-level manager at a rival investment bank, hungry and ruthless. Julian met Richard at a charity gala, befriending him under the guise of intellectual admiration. Richard, trusting and naive, shared his complete code with Julian, including all the theoretical contingency concepts, his ethical guidelines for market stability. Julian, however, had his own plans. He used the core Titan code to create a high-risk, high-reward, predatory trading system. When Richard confronted him, Julian realized he had to silence him. He systematically fabricated evidence of offshore shell companies and illegal fund transfers, perfectly framing Richard for embezzling the money Julian himself had stolen to fund his new venture, Thorne Capital. Richard Vance went to a federal prison in upstate New York. Before he was arrested, he managed to mail his complete, annotated research journals to his 15-year-old daughter, Elena, with a single note: "The truth is in the math. Never forget." Elena watched her father, her hero, die in prison, his reputation ruined. She was pulled out of her advanced mathematics program at MIT because the family's assets were seized. She was forced to care for her younger sister, Clara, whose autoimmune disease flared up under the stress. Elena didn't waste her time on anger. She spent 3 years working menial jobs and dedicating every spare hour to deciphering her father's complex, handwritten journals. She didn't just understand the Titan code, she understood Julian Thorne's psychology, his financial footprint, and most importantly, the vulnerabilities in the Sterling Hale insurance systems that Thorne Capital used. The greatest irony was that Julian didn't fear the Titan algorithm. He feared the system he thought he controlled, the mundane world of insurance, compliance, and corporate liability. Julian decided to strike back immediately. He called his longtime contact, Sandra Keyes, a sensationalist financial journalist at the Wall Street Standard. "Sandra, I have the biggest story of the year." Julian's voice was strained, but authoritative. "It's about the Novacore hit, and it involves corporate espionage, revenge, and the daughter of the biggest embezzler of the last decade." He fed her a carefully crafted lie. Elena Vance, a disgraced, unstable daughter, was leveraging her father's stolen research to launch a terrorist attack against a stable American firm. He omitted any mention of the insurance liability, focusing solely on the stolen Titan code and the vengeful hacker. He gave her exclusive, heavily redacted details on Richard Vance's criminal conviction. By 6 p.m. Thursday, the headline flashed across every major financial news outlet: "Revenge of the Embezzler's Daughter. Waitress hacker launches vengeful strike against Thorne Capital." The narrative worked. Investors weren't worried about accounting liabilities. They were terrified of a rogue hacker. The media painted Elena as a villain, a disturbed young woman out for revenge, fueled by her father's criminal legacy. The stock of Thorne Capital, already down from the Novacore loss, plummeted further in the after-hours trading. But Julian felt a grim satisfaction. He had neutralized Elena's greatest weapon, her moral standing. He called Elena's cell phone, a number he had gotten from Marcus. "The clock is still ticking," Julian said, his voice flat. "But now, the world knows you are a criminal, an obsessed hacker. You win, and you'll go to prison, and your sister will still lose her medication." There was a long silence on the other end. "You really think that's the worst thing you could do to me?" Elena's voice was low and unsettlingly calm. "You stole my father's name, Julian. You stole his life. You can't steal my resolve." "You have 20 hours, Elena. I'm going to find the loophole, and then I'm going to have you arrested." Elena hung up without another word. Julian spent the night in a meeting with his top lawyers, desperately trying to find a way to discredit the $1.2 billion liability claim. The lawyers confirmed that Elena's method of aggregating the claims, while unconventional, was technically valid, and the liability was indeed tied to the firm's capital base. "The only way to avoid the crash is to pay the claim, Julian," the lead counsel stated gravely, "but paying it forces us into an insolvency event anyway. Then we don't pay it. We contest it." "Against whom? The claims are real." She just gathered them. The lawyer sighed. "Mr. Thorne, you need to find this woman and have her sign a declaration discrediting the claim, or you need to do exactly what she asked: relinquish control of the company." As the first light of Friday dawned, Julian realized the terrible truth. Elena hadn't lied about the contingency. She had just hidden it in the most obvious place. Julian, broken and defeated, sat back in his chair. He had 20 hours to choose between his pride and his survival. He had to sign. He had to concede. He picked up the phone to call his lawyer to draft the transfer of control, but just as he put the phone to his ear, his private line flashed red. It was a restricted number. He answered. "Thorne. It's Elena." Her voice was clear, but urgent. "You signed my father's death warrant, Julian, but you will not sign my sister's. What do you want now? The press is destroying you. You have nothing left." "I have the truth," Elena said, her voice rising with power. "And I just sent it to Sandra Keyes." "What truth?" Julian demanded. "The one about the real embezzlement," Elena hissed. "The complete, unredacted financial journals from my father, with all the original Titan Code notes. They prove my father's innocence. And I also included the signed transfer of funds you used to set up your Thorne Capital, funds stolen from the Perez Family Foundation that you never returned. Julian, I didn't attack your liability. I attacked your original sin." Julian dropped the phone. The Perez Family Foundation was a massive, decades-old secret, a crime committed before he even founded Thorne Capital. If that was exposed, he wouldn't just lose his company, he would go to federal prison for a lifetime. Elena didn't need the $1.2 billion claim to hit. She just needed to expose his past. "Julian," Elena's voice crackled from the abandoned phone speaker. "It's 7 a.m. You have 2 hours to meet my notary at the library, sign the transfer, and write the apology. If not, the world will know you are a thief, a liar, and a fraud who built his empire on the backs of the dead." The tension is at its breaking point. Julian Thorne arrived at the law office he had rented for the meeting at 8:45 a.m. It was not the library this time, but a nondescript, neutral office building in the financial district, a setting Julian believed was more controllable. He was flanked by his last loyal asset, Marcus, and 2 of the sharpest corporate lawyers in Manhattan, Michael and David. Elena was already there, sitting quietly at a conference table, bathed in the early morning sunlight. She was alone, save for a small, older man with a gentle face, who introduced himself as Mr. Henderson, a retired justice of the peace and licensed notary. It was the same Mr. Henderson who owned the apartment building where Elena lived. "Mr. Thorne," Elena greeted him without standing. "You're late, and you brought guests." "My lawyers are here to ensure this document is legally sound," Julian snapped, sliding the drafted resignation and transfer papers across the table. They were meticulously prepared, designed to give Elena control while ensuring Julian wasn't immediately arrested for the Perez Family Foundation crime she had threatened to expose. "We don't need your lawyers, Julian," Elena said, pushing the documents back. "We need mine." She opened the worn leather briefcase. It contained a fresh set of papers, along with the original financial journals of her father. The documents were not just about the transfer of 51% of Thorne Capital to the Vance Ethics Trust. They included a detailed confession of fraud, written and witnessed by Richard Vance before his death, detailing how Julian had stolen the Titan Code and set him up. "This is not what we agreed upon," Julian roared, pointing at the confession document. "I will sign the transfer, but I will not sign a confession that sends me to prison." "It doesn't send you to prison, Julian," Elena corrected him calmly. "It serves as the legal foundation for the trust to claw back the original stolen capital. It proves Richard Vance's innocence, and it allows me to activate the final lock on the Titan system." Julian's lawyer, Michael, leaned over and whispered, "Julian, if she exposes the Perez Foundation theft, this is the lesser of 2 evils. This confession deals with Vance's frame-up, which is a white-collar crime. The Perez theft is grand larceny and money laundering. Sign it, and we contain the damage." Julian glared at Elena, seeing the decade of calculated vengeance in her eyes. He knew he was beaten. He grabbed the pen. As he was signing the transfer papers, his name scrawled in a frantic, shaky hand across the bottom of the document that effectively ended his reign. Elena leaned forward. "The money laundering," she said softly, watching him sign. "It wasn't just the Perez Foundation, Julian. That was just the seed money. The real crime that brought you down wasn't the past. It was what you did today." Julian stopped signing, his eyes wide. "What are you talking about?" "This morning," Elena continued, "when you leaked the false story to Sandra Keyes at the Wall Street Standard, you painted me as a reckless hacker using insider information. You manipulated the market based on a fabricated story to save your share price. That's market manipulation and securities fraud." Julian stammered, I was protecting my investors. I was countering your attack." "No," Elena shook her head. I never said I hacked anything. I exposed your liability, which is an accounting risk. You responded by lying to the press about corporate espionage to drive the stock down further, allowing you and Marcus to aggressively short your own stock in the after-hours trading to hedge your losses. Marcus, who was standing behind Julian, suddenly looked ill. I have the audio recording of your conversation with Sandra Keyes, Elena stated, reaching into the briefcase and pulling out a small encrypted USB stick. And I have the trading records showing that at 6:05 p.m. yesterday, 5 minutes after the press leak, both your personal offshore accounts and Marcus's account executed massive short positions against Thorne Capital. Julian looked at Marcus, whose eyes instantly darted away. They had tried to profit one last time from the chaos Julian had created, using the false narrative as cover. Elena pushed the final page, the official resignation, toward Julian. By signing this, you save yourself from the federal investigation into the Perez Foundation and the market manipulation you committed today. If you refuse, I will walk out of here and send the USB stick and the confession directly to the SEC. Julian Thorne, the once untouchable titan of Wall Street, broke. He signed the resignation, the pen scratching violently against the heavy parchment. It is done, Mr. Henderson, the notary, stated calmly, stamping the document. The shares are transferred to the Vance Ethics Trust. Ms. Vance is now the chairwoman and controlling shareholder. Elena stood up, tucking the signed documents and the USB stick back into the briefcase. Julian, you wanted financial advice. He looked at her, his face a mask of bitter hatred and despair. Here is the last piece, Elena said, her voice dropping to a final, commanding whisper. Never assume the person serving you is invisible, because they are often the only one who sees you clearly. Julian Thorne walked out of the office, a private citizen, stripped of his power, his wealth controlled by the very victim he had mocked. He was left with a modest personal fortune, a tarnished reputation, and the knowledge that every move he had made was anticipated by the quiet woman who used to refill his water glass. 2 days later, the Wall Street Standard ran a new headline. Breaking: Thorne Capital. CEO resigns amidst ethics inquiry. Company control transferred to Vance Ethics Trust. The article didn't mention the Perez Foundation or the market manipulation. Elena had kept her word. By transferring control, Julian had contained his criminal exposure, but the market saw his resignation as an admission of severe ethical failure. The company was saved from insolvency by Elena, who immediately used her new power to formally settle the $1.2 billion liability claim, stabilizing the stock and signaling to regulators that the internal rot had been excised. Elena Vance, chairwoman of the Vance Ethics Trust and controlling shareholder of the newly rebranded Ethelred Capital, a nod to the ethical principles of her father's work, held her first board meeting. Marcus and Arthur were summarily fired. The first order of business was to publicly exonerate Richard Vance, leveraging the notarized confession to clear his name and reputation. Elena used the firm's considerable resources to establish a massive fund dedicated to medical research for autoimmune diseases, ensuring her sister Clara received the best care in the world. She didn't seek personal wealth. She sought justice and the reclamation of her family's legacy. As for Julian Thorne, the golden boy was finally broken. He tried to start a small consultancy firm, but the stigma of the Thorne Capital downfall, the whispers of his forced resignation, and the public shame of his ethical collapse followed him like a shadow. He was forever an outcast, a shark with no teeth, forced to watch from the sidelines, as the woman he dismissed as the help restored honor to the empire he had built on a lie. His silence was bought by his freedom. His fate was sealed by his own arrogance. Julian Thorne thought he could buy the world, but he forgot the most valuable currency, knowledge and integrity. Elena Vance spent 3 years in the golden cage of servitude, not serving him, but studying him, waiting for the one mistake arrogance always guarantees. Her story proves that power is not about the size of your bank account. It's about how clearly you see the weaknesses in the giant standing before you. The billionaire asked for a joke, and she delivered a punchline that ended his career. If you were captivated by Elena's patience and brilliant takedown, let us know in the comments. Hit that like button if you believe that karma always comes back, even for the untouchable elite. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that the most dangerous people are often the ones you overlook. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because our next story is about the CEO who tried to hide his entire fortune in offshore gold, and the janitor who found the key to the vault.